Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News, South Florida Conservative News Service, www.southfloridaconservative.com for the more in-depth report with all the information that we will be discussing in this video. Today is it Sunday, September 14th, 4:30 p.m. And we're going to be talking about the mishandling of the Charlie Kirk investigation, as you are all probably wondering yourself. And will this become what we have had happen in the past in the United States with the JFK, RFK, and MLK investigations, where it's always a mystery what really happened, who really did it, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, it is going in that direction as we speak. So, as I said, like the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, specifically those two, because at least with John F. Kennedy, you had the giant book of facts, the Warren Commission. The Kirk case raises questions of motive, conspiracy, and trust in our institutions. And this whole thing that we are doing is based on how you would handle a similar high profile assassination of a civil rights leader. Kirk, in our mind, is going to be considered a civil rights leader because he is. All right. Political factional violence is different. This is a civil rights case. That's what I think you'll see the federal government, when they go to move for execution of whoever it is actually did this, will go and do it in that manner or something similar. I have to check out what all occurred in the Oklahoma bombing, because you assume the same kind of charges are going to go along those lines. Although that was a federal institution, let me not confuse you further. So this case raises questions of motive, conspiracy, and trust in our institutions. And as we'll see, the strengths and failures of this investigation may determine whether the public accepts it as justice or views it as just another unsolved political tragedy. So, what has law enforcement done right? You can argue, but let's just stick with this, all right? First, credit where it's due. The response was pretty immediate considering the venue. Local police, Utah state authorities, and federal agents, the FBI, ATF, were mobilized within hours. The 33-hour manhunt brought in the primary suspect, Tyler Robinson. I'm not going to argue how he got into there, but it took 33 hours to get him there. Like I said, we're not complete because we don't know everything. Investigators recovered solid evidence. Once again, going by what we have, a rifle, bullet casings, and bullets inscribed with disturbing disturbing messages, which we've seen this all before, right? Thousands of tips. They said over 7,000 tips came into the FBI tip line. And obviously, the six-figure reward didn't hurt. Okay. That kind of mobilization and evidence collection shows that the machinery of law enforcement still works when the pressure is on. And by releasing some details like the inscriptions on the bullet and surveillance photos of a person of interest, investigators managed to maintain a degree of transparency with the public. They did not lock the whole thing down. The public saw some information, probably a little more than it needed to in certain ways and not enough in others, but that's what it is. So on the other side of that, FBI Director Kash Patel announced that there was a suspect in custody, only to later retract that statement. In reality, the person had been detained, questioned, and released. And that was the fellow who claimed that he had done it, if you recall. In a case this high profile, that is not a small error. It damages the public trust. It confuses the media. God knows they don't need that. And it complicates the investigation because it's going to come back later and say that we had the guy. As an aside, the person that said he did it being released as he did without them going through the phone and copying everything they could and really moving harder on him than they did, in my mind, was a mistake. Why would he do that? And they'll say, well, he was just being a dick because he's a professional political scumbag. does not matter. If you are going to waste police time, time is valuable when you're looking for a murderer. He should have been banged up with some kind of charge, which there are charges for. But in the meantime, he should have been considered as part of the team, meaning all due and timely pressure should have been placed upon that man, especially the phone. Okay. So then there's the politics. The governor of Utah jumps out and ahead of everything and called it a political assassination almost immediately. All right. That kind of statement before investigators can present a motive or evidence risks contaminating the jury pool and locking the narrative into a partisan frame. I have a feeling it was done specifically as an FU. He wasn't just trying to cover for himself, or there would have been an insanely larger police presence. But once again, supposedly there was no inclination that this was going to occur. But we are finding out that that is not true. I cannot comment at this point because, once again, we do not know. The suspect isn't cooperating, okay? That leaves the prosecutors without confessions or clear explanations, forcing them to lean entirely on forensics and digital evidence. And on top of that, the security failures are glaring. Kirk was speaking to nearly 3,000 people, but the shooter managed to gain a rooftop vantage point 200 yards away. That suggests prior planning and exposes how thin the protective net around Charlie Kirk really was. Having seen a lot of his things, and I've mentioned it here before, so that we don't sound like we're changing our tune all the time, Kirk did not wear armor. All right. They're going to say, oh, it was this. I don't think he wore armor. I don't, at any given time, he had X amount of people around him. He was incredibly accessible. When I heard he was shot, I've said this again, I thought it would have been somebody just walked up and popped him right there. You're only 6 or 8 feet away, right? And you could have just done it. South America style, as we say. Okay. So what we are stuck with now are a lot of questions. And in this, we're going to have to ask these questions ourselves. Have investigators seized on all of Robinson's, that's the shooters, digital records, phones, laptops, social media accounts? Was he truly a lone wolf? Or was he influenced, encouraged, or supported by others? As I said, you had the fellow they arrested initially. There is a second fellow who is waving back at the video when everybody else is running. He is waving. Who is he? Why hasn't he been found? Did investigators secure the scene perfectly? Or will we later learn the early mistakes compromised the evidence? I remember hearing, and it doesn't matter, but if I heard it, somebody else had to have heard it, unless we were all talking to different people, that they found the rifle on the roof. And that's where the palm print and everything else was. He has fingerprints on the rifle and a palm print where he was set up. And the rifle was there. That was, maybe I just heard it wrong. Then, of course, it ends up in the bushes. And there's the question of the scopes and this and that and the other thing. And how did they get out there with nobody seeing it? There are a number of questions going on there, right? That's where I'm saying, did they secure the scene perfectly? Or is this going to come back later on in a court case and bite everybody in the ass? The public also wants closure, but history shows you how hard that is. Think about the JFK assassination. Think about Martin Luther King's assassination, right? Official reports declared case closed, yet decades later, documents are still being declassified and doubts remain. Okay. The Kirk investigation highlights a similar tension. On one hand, you have the need for speed, capture a suspect, calm the public, show that law enforcement is in control. On the other hand, you need accuracy, get the facts right, avoid misstatements, and prove the case in court. Every premature announcement, every moment of political spin feeds conspiracy theories and also goes into the ear of a potential jury pool. All right. It undermines faith in the process. So the lessons are clear. And this feeds into, if you are a conspiracy theorist, the idea of a socialist movement due to the fact that I can kill with impunity. And if I get the right jury pool, I will not be convicted because I've killed an evil whatever I killed. We don't even discuss that yet. All right. And we won't until it gets closer to that time. So the lessons are clear. They should be verifying everything before they announce it. They need to dig deep to rule out accomplices. They bring in independent oversight. I would suggest, and it should have been done the other day when the governor got his ass in there and started talking, Pam Bondi or whoever plays Pam Bondi in the television show should have already put together a task force, should have already assigned a special prosecutor to this. She can do those kind of things. If she's busy doing her hair or whatever the hell she does in Washington, because it's not prosecute cases, send somebody who wants to make a career because this has to be done. You have to have a special prosecutor. You have to keep the investigation above politics. You have to maintain tight control over the evidence and public messaging. All right. Because only then can the public trust that justice was done and not just told as it was. We want to have the document at the end. And this has come up in a couple of things that I've talked about recently. The thing with Fauci and Rand Paul and all. The federal government has a habit of running up gigantic bills to do things. And at the end of the day, they have nothing to show. They say, well, we don't need to show anything because it was open and closed case. There should be an entire report done. And I'll use Fauci as an example because I don't know enough about this guy to say one way or another. And I just said we can't say something and screw up the jury pool. At the end of the day, Rand Paul should have said, here is the document from all of our hearings, and it's all been put together, and we've evaluated, and it proves that we should have been able, if he hadn't been pardoned by an illegal presidential regime, Fauci should have been standing trial for murder, for a couple of other things, treason, of course, and shit like that. We can't do it, but he should have been tried for it because he was guilty. That is also what you saw in the Warren Commission, but they were trying to get all this flimsy evidence together to do it. This has to be solid information. We can't have things hanging out in the open that people have already debunked, so to speak. And it has to be run like a real top tier murder investigation. They're going to want to charge him federally, probably under violating Charlie Kirk's civil rights. I don't know if that's a death penalty offense or not, but they'll definitely go at him that way. Utah has a firing squad, but once again, it's a death penalty case. It could drag out for years. You may have a situation where it is the only guy. Here's your options. There is him. He did it for love or whatever he did it for, right? Or he's part of a much larger group of people who put him up to it, or he was a willing participant in, and he has been deluded to the fact that he is a hero to the to the oppressed and the downtrodden, and he should take his whatever like a man. I'll tell you what, if he somehow gets out on bail, the chance of him killing himself are very, very high. And that will leave us with even more questions than answers and will further erode the United States' faith in the justice system. So that's all I have for you for now. And as we move along, we'll have more. And as long as it's concrete, we'll have more. So talk to you all later on. Have a good evening.